Hey everybody, this is Jughead, and welcome to my continuing effort to get all of my episodes up onto YouTube for all of you YouTube listeners. I say listeners even though YouTube is a video-oriented format, but these are just the audio. So you can look at the screen if you'd like, but you can also just go to YouTube, turn this on, and do what you need to do. Multitask, if you have to. It's not exactly what you think it is. Look up brain science, and you'll see the brain really doesn't multitask. Other than that, I'd like you to go to the Patreon. I just have been offered the opportunity to monetize the YouTube because I've reached 1,000 subscribers, but I'm not really into the idea right now of adding commercials to these formats, so I'm not going to pursue that. Also, there's a lot of music in these that are borrowed from the bands, and it's hard to get the rights to monetize that, and I don't really feel like removing that music, and I don't have the cash to actually pay those bands. So for right now, I will not be monetizing. So please go to the Patreon at www.jugheadsbasementpodcast.com and help out however you can. At the $2, $5, and $10 tiers, you pay that monthly, or you could pay it all up at once in the front. I think that's a new option. Great. Or you can do a one-time payment to me at PayPal. There's also a button for that at my website. Or you can just go to PayPal and put in jugheadsbasement@gmail.com and give anywhere from 2 cents to $6 trillion. Good luck on that one. Or, as always, you can share these episodes. That would be great. That is the easiest and actually probably one of the best ways of helping out. Other than that, I don't have much more to say about the Sludgeworth episode. It is still one of my favorite albums of people that I've been in bands with. I think it's really great work by Vapid in a really productive period of his life. Amazing stuff on this record, and some pretty great stories about the band. This LP was put out in 1995, but my podcast of this episode was done on December 22nd, 2017. So, here it is. Thanks, everybody. Dan, when and how do you think you started to form the idea that you could be a songwriter?
I think really, a lot of it is from the encouragement, really, of you and Ben. That's really kind of what made me want to kind of get out of that shell and do it more. Because I think that was really, really, really important. Like, music was kind of a fluke. I tried playing drums and it didn't really work. And then I sang and it kind of did work. And then I found out that I could write songs as well. But when you first start, you're very shy about that. You don't know if you're any good and all that. And so, that encouragement it meant a ton with you and with Ben and with, I would say, even my mom, and then like a handful of other people. Probably the reasons why I'm, still do it to this day. But yeah, I mean, it had been building up maybe about a year, probably like when we were playing on the Punk House like EP around that era, because I had little things that I was kind of messing with. I remember playing one of them to you guys, and you liked it a lot, and we never made it a song, but I went, yeah, da 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 da, yeah, I remember, you guys liking that one. So I don't know, it just kind of sparked from there, I think. Really, I think it really pretty much fell in place. Probably it had been building, but I think it just kind of improved around that time.
Wasted Away is the first song on this record. Do you have any memories or thoughts on or about lyrics?
I felt like we had something special, and we were having those musical differences. We were kind of, that song did come out, and I really like that song as well. But it was kind of about that, how I felt about it. I felt, wow, we have this thing. We need to kind of keep moving it forward, but we couldn't really agree on how to do it.
Something good, but nothing goes away. The worst it gets.
welcome to episode 23 of Jughead's Basement, featuring the Chicago-based band Sludgeworth. Sludgeworth formed in 1989. The band released their first EP in 1990 on Roadkill Records, the label initiated by Dave Best, Ben Weasel, and me, myself, and I, Jughead. Sludgeworth released their first and only full-length record in 1991 on Johann's Face Records, run by No Empathy frontman Mark Ruvolo. Sludgeworth self-released a 7-inch single in 1992, and then announced their official breakup of the band. Although the band had a very short life, the effect of the band on the newly surfacing pop-punk scene was important but underspoken. In 1995, Lookout Records released a compilation of their material, Losers of the Year, of which this podcast is dedicated to. Now you will hear from 4 of the 5 band members of Sludgeworth, including vocalist Dan Vapid, guitarist Adam White, bassist Mike Hootenstart, and drummist Brian Vermin. So with no further ado, Sludgeworth's Loser of the Year. Track 2, Someday.
Someday, yeah. Someday was a song that I wrote. I wrote everything except for the very beginning. Ding, 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 ding. That was Dave. But everything else was mine. And it was probably the first song I ever wrote that I was like really kind of like I surprised myself. I was like, whoa. And so I haven't really written many of those over the course of the years, but with that one, I did. So I was really excited about that. You know, it was about a breakup of a girlfriend.
To name something Someday sort of implies, you know, it's a title that reaches into the past or the future. What is it referencing? Someday. Someday what?
What would someday? Well, you know, that you'll be all right. It'll work itself out. And it did. And I guess I knew that then, but didn't feel that way. Everything feels like a huge deal when you're 19.
Adam, where were you born and where were you raised?
I was born in Chicago area, raised in Des Plaines, up near O'Hare Airport.
Were you actually born in the city and then raised in Des Plaines, or were you actually...
Well, I was born in a city, in a hospital in the city, but yeah, I was, like, from day one, I was living in Des Plaines.
Are you still out in the burbs, or have you...
Nope. I've been in the city now for the last 25 years or so. Got out of the suburbs because I hate them.
Yeah, I think, me too. Now, I actually consider myself a city person, because now, you know, I think you too probably been in the city longer than we've not been in the city. So.
Yeah, exactly. I've been in the city for 25 years, and I was in the suburbs for a little over 20.
Actually, technically speaking, I was born about, I want to say about 4 or 5 blocks from where you grew up. I was actually, the first house I lived in was in Mount Prospect. Was born at Holy Family Hospital in Des Plaines, moved to Mount Prospect, and then maybe I was about 2 years old when we moved to Des Plaines. So I don't remember Mount Prospect, but it was very close to where you grew up. Yeah, I lived in Des Plaines up until I was 19, I think, and then moved into Chicago.
Mike, where were you born and raised?
And on the north side of Chicago.
North side of Chicago. Are you actually, were you actually in the city, or you were like from the suburbs like a lot of us out there?
Well, now I'm out there, but I moved out of the city in like 98.
Right, so you were a city boy. Who in the band was in the city? I know like Vapid and I were out in Des Plaines, and so was Adam.
Yeah, Dave was in the city, and so was Brian.
Born and raised in Chicago. North side, like Irving and Pulaski, old Irving Park area.
A lot of the people that I worked with from bands and Weasel and all the other bands were like suburban born, moved into the city, but you're one of the ones that was right in the city. Did you feel a difference between like us and you? Did it feel any different in your like personality?
No, not at all. You know, it actually, in terms of members of Sludgeworth, I think the only ones from the Burbs were Dan and Adam. And the only thing that felt different is, like, they always had, like, really cool stories about, like parties and like stuff. Like, we kind of didn't have that in the city. We just kind of, like, roamed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it seems like they had maybe a little more of like a Fast Times at Ridgemont High kind of thing going on. Or, you know, we're latchkey kids at that time, so, like, you know, you were 7 and your parents, you know, you had a key to your front door and you just go.
Yeah, a couple of people that I know that were a city were like that. You sort of experienced the world, I think, earlier. You know, you tend to just have it right in your face right there, all the goings on.
Yeah, and it's really crazy because being a father now, like, I can't even imagine, like, having my kid walk to school or leave the yard. You know what I mean? It's just a different world.
You'll be all right someday.
Track 3, Anytime.
That's another a breakup song mixed with anxiety and depression.
Do you think this was in some ways, I mean, I know we all deal with different levels of anxiety, and you and Ben, way more than me, have had to deal with that. Do you think a lot of the songwriting was coming to recognize that in yourself and dealing with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a lot of it, I hadn't been to a doctor at that point either, and I had been living with it for, you know, since I was like 13. So I lived 10 years without even seeing a doctor about any of those symptoms. A lot of the way I dealt with it was writing in journals, like writing lyrics or writing songs. So Sludgeworth definitely were addressing stuff like that. But like I said earlier, I also try to want to, like, keep like a note of being hopeful, because I didn't think it was, I knew there was stuff like kind of inside that were messed up, but I thought, you know, I thought it would be all right someday, eventually.
Adam, give us, before touching on Sludgeworth, give me a little bit of your band history beforehand.
I was 13 and first got a guitar. We would write punk songs with Dan Schafer, actually. I met him when we were in, I think I just finished 8th grade, so I was like 13. And we were all just discovering underground metal and punk at the time. And we happened to be wandering through the streets of Des Plaines with nothing to do, basically, and saw another kid that had, I forget what shirt he had on, but we're like, oh, he seems a little bit like us. So we started talking with Dan and ended up becoming friends. I don't know how many months after that, but we would all start just kind of jamming in my living room and using the couch as the drums. It was pretty primitive or whatever. Like, no one had money for good equipment or whatever, so we didn't have drums for like the first year that we were a band. We actually ended up using a basketball and bucket for our drums for the first year we were a band, after we got to the garage out of my living room.
Dan, when did you start writing lyrics?
In high school, I would always be writing stuff, and they were always in song form, you know, they're always in verse, chorus, and I wouldn't even know why I was doing it, but I would do one like just about every day. By the time I was like within maybe 2 years, I had like 3 or 4 notebooks just filled with lyrics. And a lot of it was terrible, you know. But for some reason, I was just really drawn to it, and it was kind of an outlet. It was something I definitely needed at that age.
Fuck off! Go away! Let me alone!
So Adam, before you started Sludgeworth, Dan was in Generation Waste, right?
Get the fuck away from me! Leave me alone! Let me be! I don't got the evidence! I'm not you and you're not me!
Correct. Yeah, he had done Generation Waste, and I was spending a lot of time in my basement and at my friend's house down the street, and I kind of went off the radar for a little while as far as the punk scene and everything, just kind of for about 2 years doing whatever I was doing, and then went to hang out with some friends, and they played Generation Waste, and I couldn't believe it was Dan singing, because it didn't even sound like him at the time, you know, like the first time you hear your friend singing in a band that's actually recorded, that wasn't recorded on a tape player in the living room, it sounded way more professional. I was like, oh wow, Dan sounds pretty damn good.
Looking back, I mean, it was kind of funny at the time. Like, Ted wrote a lot of the lyrics, Frank wrote a lot of the music. You know, I was kind of younger in the band. They were a little older than I was, so it was almost like if I had an idea, it was almost like, oh, you know, our singer's got an idea, isn't it? Yeah. It was a little patronizing. I don't think they intentionally meant it that way, but it came off that way at times, and I was young, so it was just like, okay, and I just kind of rolled with it. I had it all, but I would not dare let anybody read it, you know. I'd be like, well, hell no. I was very guarded with it, but, you know, like I said, I had notebooks full of it.
Track 4, Only One. Brian, who was the first person you met from Sludgeworth?
I was in the metal band with Strat, who was the bass player.
Strat was Mike Hootenstrat's nickname.
So he would be the first. He went to the same high school as well. And then after that would be Dan. I knew Dan from being in Generation Waste and just going to shows and hanging out, going to parties and stuff like that. So,
Brian, before you were in Sludgeworth, you and Vapid were in Screech and Weasel. First, you were on drums for 2 tours, and then Vapid came in a little bit later. Can you talk a little bit about that? How old were you?
15. I was 15. And I was 15 on the first tour, and I was still 15, I think, when we did the second tour, because that's when Ben made me, he said, well, if you can't drive, you have to stay awake the whole time. And I think the first show was in, like, Idaho. Remember that?
Yeah.
Being punished for my lines. But.
Yeah. So that was us in what I call the Malibu tour, right? So is in the Chevy Malibu, is you, me, Vapid, and Ben in the Malibu with all the drums, and we had that big thing on top of the car that almost blew off.
Yeah, remember? But because I think Dave Best helped get that van where that like blew up like 2 weeks before we were going to go or something like that.
Yeah. We went to Wisconsin or something like that, and it was already like leaking oil on the way back. I remember, so I was following behind you and Ben, and it was just getting oil, then it just sat in my driveway.
The only thing I remember about it, like inside, it had like really like gross carpet.
Well, that's even more than I remember. I just remember it sitting in my driveway and having to deal with it when we got back from tour.
Dave McLean respectfully turned down the interview process for this podcast, and after much deliberation, the band decided to continue with the episode. I want to say that Dave had a huge effect on the direction of the band, and I was saddened that we could not get him to talk about the band. This next section references David directly, and I felt this was the time to mention his contribution as guitarist and songwriter for the band. Track number 5, Another Day.
Yeah, my memory of that is just, it was ex-girlfriend. She had an apartment. We lived there. A bunch of other people lived there, and they weren't getting along, and it was kind of getting to be trashed, and like it was just kind of a little time of they just kind of need a. I'm thinking as I'm saying this here, but it was about an apartment that a very old girlfriend lived in with a bunch of people, and it just kind of relationships got a little soured.
Mike, before we touch on Sludgeworth, can you tell me who you met first before starting the band?
Well, me and Dave McQuaid have been playing since '85. So, I mean, we haven't played together in years, but if you added up all the years together, me and Dave played together for like 27 years.
Where did you guys meet? Do you remember?
When we were putting together this hardcore band, I met him through our drummer, George Rice. And Dave McQuaid came over, and we've been all played together ever since.
Did you write with him? I know that he was one of the other main writers in Sludgeworth. Did you sit around at all with him, like coming up with the parts, or was it always more about once the band was together in rehearsal?
I'm a big part of all the songs that were written as long as Dave and I have been together.
Mike, how did Sludgeworth form? How did your participation in it?
I was living with Dave McQuaid, and we had met Dan years before, and then basically he came over one day, and we were hanging around in Dave's bedroom, and we just started playing, and next thing you know, that just happened. I mean, it was just that easy, you know?
Yeah. No, I love stories like that, because sometimes you have about, people put something, an ad in somewhere, and, you start a band, but then it's really cool when it's just sort of friends hanging out, and it just... something happens where it seems right in the moment.
Yeah, I would have to say it started with Dan and Dave. And luckily at the time I was living with Dave, so it all worked out.
Dave and I ended up jamming together like once or twice, and I had some songs, but they just kind of just didn't go anywhere. I didn't have a drummer, I didn't have, much to beyond that. So it just kind of fell apart, and then like I said, I played in, you guys asked me to play in Screeching Weasel, and then so I did that, and by the time we broke up the first time, I had contacted Adam, so we started playing, and then I introduced Adam to Dave, and then Strat, and then our first practice was in Adam's basement, and we had the drummer try out he was in Unified Field, I think. It didn't quite spark, but then Brian, I had talked to him, and he's like, well, it's like, why don't we try playing? I'm like, okay. So then I'd said, yeah, I've got Dave and Strat here, and then Adam, and we just ended up playing at the same place where Screeching Weasel used to rehearse, down in the basement there. We just kind of stuck with that lineup. It kind of just fell into place.
This is track number 6, I Analyze. In this song, you will hear from Brian Vermin and then Adam, back to Brian Vermin. They will be talking about practicing in Vermin's basement, which also used to be the practice space for Screeching Weasel with Ben, me, Brian, and Vapid.
The thing about Sludgeworth rehearsals, Sludgeworth, it's crazy. I know all these people in bands now, and there's people in different cities and states in their band, and I don't get it, because when we were Sludgeworth, we rehearsed like 3, maybe 4 times a week. And it wasn't a rehearsal, it was a show. Like, my mother's basement would be packed with people that came to our rehearsals. So every rehearsal was a show, basically.
Huh, that's interesting. Yeah. That was my next question too, is the rehearsals at your house, because I have fond memories of that. Your mother was always pretty great to us and sort of nurtured you being in a band, so it makes sense that that people would just start gathering for Sludgeworth there too.
Yeah, it's funny, I would get in trouble, not the fact that there were like 40 people in the basement, but I would get in trouble because someone left the gate open, or, someone left beer cans in the front of the house. Like, never mind the fact there was 40 people, it was full fire hazard, and like, we're playing punk rock music for 4 hours at crack while my dad's trying to watch a Maury Povich show. It's like, that didn't matter. Someone forgot to close the gate.
There were times when I'd get there early and walk in kind of uncomfortably with his dad seemed like a nice guy, but he was kind of intimidating. I remember being like a little bit scared, not scared, but like just kind of uncomfortable, sitting around in the living room on the couch waiting for Brian so we could go down to the basement to start jamming. But in general, it was just pretty cool because we could jam whenever we wanted in their basement, and his mom would come down and say hi and hang out with us for a bit. It was very cool. His parents were super cool about us jamming there, which now I think about had to be a noisy pain in the ass to have us in the basement. But yeah, they were very cool about it, and his mom, I think, went to like every show we did for like the first year we were a band or something like that. She was kind of the sixth member or something, she was awesome.
I don't want to go on a tangent about my mama, but she's always been real supportive, and she knew all the people, and suffice it to say, like, back in the day, like, everyone was pretty cool, man. Everyone from that era, they were just good people in general. I mean, yeah, we were drinking and we were playing music and stuff, but it was so harmless, and like, I think she was just glad that it wasn't like gangbanging or, doing stupid stuff. So I think we were going to open up for Naked Ray Gun and so rehearsal was like real serious. Like, we didn't let people come to rehearsals and stuff like that. And Dave needed something for his chord. And like, my mom, like, is driving Dave around the city trying to find a piece for his chord. Like, my mom, she was wrapped. And I remember when we got the call, she's like, we were rehearsing, and it was a landline. So my mom's like, Brian, I have a phone call. It's a Jeff Pizzotti or something. I'm like, holy shit. Like, I remember that moment, like, vividly. He was just like, and then he's like, hey, can you guys open up this at the Riviera? And I'm like, ha! Trying not to be like a screaming little girl.
I try to listen, but I'm too far away. I try to think when it all went wrong, but I still want to know.
Track number 7, Never Say Never.
Oh, yeah, that was one of those journals that I had. I was, I think it was probably about some girl initially, and then it just kind of took on a different form.
Another quality that Sludgeworth had is that writing O's and Ahs and things that the audience would sing along, that they loved singing along, incorporating themselves into it. What was your influence on that?
Those were definitely from Naked Ray Gun, and even some hardcore bands from early on, like even 7 Seconds did stuff like that, and but mostly Naked Ray Gun they had that thing of getting the audience involved and singing along, and they had that that lifting chorus.
It seems like such a simple thing, but damn, it really isn't. It isn't.
No, it's it's funny because I've been thinking about it a lot, like in the last year, and that kind of thing just seems to be gone for me. I would like to get it back somehow, but I don't know how.
I can't believe what's in front of me. I say, oh. I can't believe what I am. I say, oh.
Now, I got all the other guys talking about, because I really think rehearsing and Brian's basement was so cool, and his parents were so great.
Yeah.
So I got all the guys talking about, the partying and the band playing. So I don't need much, but is there anything you want to say in your own voice from what that experience was like?
Well, I would say with that first year and a half that we were a band, the camaraderie was just excellent. We really, really had a lot of fun in that band, and I think it showed. And I think the people that came and saw us felt that. And I think the other thing I can say about that band is I felt like everybody was really good players, and I felt like it just gelled well. You don't always get that in a band, It's it can be like it can be a lot of work to do that. I think with that one, a lot of stuff just fell into place. We had a lot of really, really great times down in that basement.
I mean, that's one thing I'll say about every band that I've been in. We practice. And what was nice about that, nobody was in any other, project, which I'm finding that hard right now because I have something new going on, and it's going really well, but they're in other projects. And it's hard to, a schedule if we miss a practice because this guy's got this other project and this guy. So that's the one good thing about that band is we were all in the band and that was it.
Dan, this one you didn't put on, but I'm only putting it on because I was listening to it. Number 8, Follow. It sounds like Fugazi. Was that an influence on you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we liked the first Fugazi record was out. I liked about half of it. The other guys in the band, I want to say they like pretty much the whole record. By the time that band were on to the second or third album, I was kind of getting into other things. I think, I had seen them a couple times when they first started. So they were, I really, like I said, I liked a handful of songs, and it was an influence, yeah.
Yeah, that song, it reminds me of The Waiting Room.
That was kind of what we're kind of going for a little bit with that one.
For track number 9, Over and Over, here are me and Strat talking about funk, hardcore, and pop punk. The Sludgeworth songs were all, like most punk songs, are scripted from beginning to end, but you guys sort of veered a little bit into funk territory. Did this allow there to be improvisations live, or was it always the song is as the song is?
It was pretty much the song is as the song is. I don't know what we were trying to do. I guess we were just trying, something new, just to try it. I'm not ashamed of anything that we've done. No, not at all. Were we good at it? Probably not. So
I didn't really have any problem. I thought it was kind of cool to add some of that sort of texture to the music. I think punk back then was a little bit more, too. Yeah, punk back then was a little bit more strict. I think it was harder to get into a band that was exploring that sort of
as far as he's saying that the punk rock was like strict, like when a lot of my friends still to this day are still into the hardcore scene and all that, and when we veered away from that to join, Sludgeworth, I mean, it was sorry to say that I lost a lot of friends because they like thought that I was quitting on the scene or whatever, but that wasn't the case at all. That was the only bad time ever in the music, was when your friends started to shun you because you didn't play that fast anymore, and now you have a vocalist that can actually sing, and that was sad.
That our time during that time was about a division between like hardcore and more melodic pop punk. I think it was a fun time, but also difficult because people were splitting over this stupid division in music.
And now, what I find funny too is those same assholes are writing paragraphs on Facebook on oh my God, I can't believe a Prince is dead. He was an amazing musician. If I would have said I was a fan of him in the 80s, they probably would have beat me up.
Track 10 is She's Not Disposable.
Yeah. Just a song, just writing about sexism, just kind of addressing it. It was kind of a thing at that time where there was change coming in within me at that point in time, where issue like that was kind of sinking in a lot more than it had previously. So that's how that came out. Yeah, we recorded with Phil Bonet. We had done part of that record, the Losers of the Year, was on the What's This record. And then we had done another session that didn't quite do anything. And we were able to use a couple tracks on that. And then we had recorded for 7-inch, and it has a 7-inch had You and I and Anytime on the other side. Those are all with Phil Bonet. Before Phil Bonet, we recorded at some studio in Crystal Lake or something like that. Someone, I think Dave may have known him. I don't know how, but we went out there and we recorded.
Did Roadkill actually release the Sludgeworth 7-inch? I don't remember that.
Yeah. The first 7-inch was on Roadkill Records, and then we did a record that was on Johann's Face. That's Mark Rubelo, Gar, and then 7-inch that just did myself. Ben helped me a little bit with that. He kind of steered me in the right direction anyway. And then Lookout.
How did it end up being on Lookout? Did you talk to Larry? Do you remember any of that? Did you talk to Larry about it?
No, I think Ben just mentioned it to Chris Applegren. Like, oh, hey, Dan's looking to put this out, and I just talked to Chris after that. That was good, because there was a point where we were, trying to get something re-released, and there was a couple other labels, and they said, hey, Lookout Records wants to do it. You're like, okay, it's kind of a big deal.
Vapid mentions Phil Bonet. Phil Bonet recorded the first two Screeching Weasel records, the self-titled and Boogada Boogada Boogada. He was a well-respected engineer back in the suburbs. He was also a strange, funny guy. He would record a lot of our records in the late overnight, so that we were able to pay less money, so that we could actually afford to get into the studios. So I wanted to read this paragraph that was written about Phil Bonet on the punkdatabase.com, which is a database about punk out of Chicago. And here it is. Phil Bonet was an engineer and producer of note throughout the 1980s and 1990s, working primarily out of Solid Sound Studios in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. He worked with a number of local bands, including Apocalypse Hoboken, Sludgeworth, Screeching Weasel, Impulse Manslaughter, No Empathy, which was Mark Ruvelow's band, and he, of course, put out the first Sludgeworth record on Johann's Face. Other bands are Sidekick Cato, Smoking Popes, Slapstick, Life Sentence, Friends of Betty, and others. He also played with the experimental rock band Cheer Accident. Phil passed away in 1999 after suffering a brain aneurysm.
You know Phil Bonet. It was like having your. It would have been like the equivalent of having like a really cool dad recording your band.
Track 11 is Crybaby. Before you hear track 11, Crybaby, you will hear from Vermin, and then you will hear from Vapid.
As a fan of the band, it was up there with, Naked Raygun had the much larger audiences than we did at the time, but your sort of audience feel had the same sort of thing. I thought your shows were very lively, like the audience was always moving around. Pretty exciting when you guys played, I thought. And Vapid seemed to be really comfortable in that band.
Dan has been in bands for so long. Like, the thing about Sludgeworth, I mentioned before that we had rehearsed a lot. Not only did we rehearse a lot, but we hung out a lot. We were always together. Someone in the band was always with someone else in the band. Like, Dave and Strat worked together. Me, Dan, and Adam hung out a lot. Me and Dan hung out a lot. We were always together, so maybe that's where that comfort came from.
Sludgeworth went on only one tour, which ended fairly... it was a rough tour. I helped book that tour, but can you give me a little of the positive and negative, what you remember of that tour?
I would say the negative would be we had what was called at the time, and maybe some bands still go through it, what was called the Chicago Syndrome, which is nobody really knows who you are outside of Chicago, so you're playing a show and it's not very well attended, and some of them fall through and all that. The positive aspects about it were we really had a lot of fun. And we played a lot of baseball on that tour. We would find like a field and we're like, all right, we had our bats and gloves and beer and we would play baseball. And it was fun as hell.
First of all, I thought it was awesome because I got to take a week off of work, or 2 weeks, whatever it was, and we were actually going to be hanging out like all day long, all the time, and it was going to be a lot of fun. So we got in the van. When we got to Pittsburgh, we're all excited for tour, and we start setting up and everything. We're like, all right, this place is kind of empty, whatever, it's early. And then we go on. When we played, there were 2 people in the crowd, and one of them was from Chicago. We thought the tour was off to a pretty awful start as far as people showing up at shows or how the shows were going to go in general. The next morning was extremely rough because we had drank a different type of beer than any of us had ever drank. So the drive from Pittsburgh to Philly was pretty awful. And there was construction the whole way. So I remember that ride being awful. After our excitement of going on tour, I think we kind of blew our load on the first night and then had to pay for it the next day. And then Philadelphia was kind of cool because we played after Tool played, and we were on South Street, and we played after them, I think because the later slot was not the ideal slot, although most of the crowd was still stuck around for us, so that was actually a really good show. And then we had hit up by New York and Boston, and we went by Joe Queer's place in New Hampshire after the Boston show, and he had a place that had a barn, and we hung out in the barn, or like we played a show in his barn for, I don't know, there was probably 20 people there or something like that. And then we created a game called Barn Ball where we were kicking a Nerf football around and had a good time there. And Joe Queer had a restaurant or something like that, and we went there afterwards, which was pretty cool too. And then when we finally headed south, we went to Jacksonville, and we were there early in the day, and we had the brilliant idea of going to the beach near Tampa so we could check out the ocean. Oh yeah, that's another thing. When we were on the East Coast, me, Dave, and Strat had never seen the ocean, so it was kind of a crazy, cool sight.
You know, we went to the beach in Florida, got really horribly sunburned, you know, which was really one of those things looking back, where, you know, I kind of shake my head and go, what the fuck are we thinking about?
So we got like a case of beer, went out to the beach, and I fell asleep for 2 or 3 hours in the sun, and those guys, I think, slept. I'm not sure what they did. We were running around in the Gulf, and every one of us got sun poisoning. So we drove back up to Jacksonville and started realizing we're all like, you get flu-like symptoms and you want to throw up. So we all take a shower hoping it would fix us, and it didn't. So we went to the venue in Jacksonville. We were laying around and no one was showing up. So we asked if we could cancel the show because we were all sick. So we actually ended up canceling that show and going back to the hotel and sleeping for 10 hours.
I had never really been anywhere. Just to go on the road with these guys, it was a nonstop laugh. Sure, we got into, you know, a little, I don't want to say arguments, but, you know, we weren't really well known, so I didn't expect to go and play at a bar in South Carolina at 1 a.m. on a Tuesday and expect anybody in there. But we did it. We had good shows, and I'm not going to say we had bad shows. We just had shows that nobody was there for. I just wish it could have lasted longer, and I wish we could have went on more.
I remember thinking on that tour, I wish that we could be a band that could just kind of go for it and just kind of tour all year. I remember voicing my opinion about that a lot back then. I'm not really sure what was going on in the heads of the other guys, but maybe that tour could be the reason why they went, I don't know, you know, and maybe didn't want to kind of take it to that level or something. I don't really know. You'd have to ask them, but that was kind of a little bit of a turning point, I think, at least for me.
Number 12, nearest one to stand behind.
Yeah, that's just about being yourself and, you know, not being afraid to do it. That's it. And that was a song where, you know, Dave had the main riff, and then that thing in the chorus, which I really liked, what he came up with a lot. It was great. And then, you know, I think I came up with the bridge, and then again, it was just one of those collaborations. Most of the Sludgeworth songs were collaborations. There's only a few songs that I wrote by myself, just a handful. Probably even less than that, but I think that's probably why, I don't know, maybe that's another reason why I was able to get that sound. It's because there's different vibes kind of going on, and you can kind of carry it out.
Dan, Dave chose not to participate in the podcast, but I'd still like a few words about his participation in Sludgeworth.
Well, when we first started playing, he really was the musician of the band. Like I felt like me, Adam, Strat, and Brian were more on the same level, and Dave was like 2 notches up. And so I feel like for that first year we were a band, we were kind of catching up to him. And I think after about a year we got there, but I always felt like he was really still the musician of the band. He came up with, he's probably the best guitar player I've ever played with as well. I've played with some really, really good guitar players, but he's one of the more creative guitar players that I played with. A lot of those little licks he came up with. He didn't, we came up with some of them together. Some of them I came up with the stuff in Someday, but like the very, the intro to Someday, that was Dave, and just a lot of those little leads that were really big in that band, those were Dave, you know. The sound of that band wouldn't be the same if Dave wasn't there, you know. I don't think anybody would deny that.
And now we bring you to track 13, Angry Man. First you will hear from Vermin, and then you will hear Vapid, and then to Adam, and then back to Brian Vermin to discuss a little bit about the band after Sludgeworth, Ethylene.
Now, Brian, I want to move into a little bit of, like we had said earlier, the beginning of the end. What do you believe happened to Sludgeworth, and what was the beginning of the end for the band?
Ever since the band ended, I've kind of been asked that question. People would always be like, "Oh, was it because you guys wanted to play the rest of the band wanted to play more funk, and Dan wanted to play more pop?" And to tell you the truth, I don't believe that to be the reason at all, because all the funky songs that we did, those were all done in rehearsal for fun, and they transpired really well to break up the monotony of a punk show, and I don't think the rest of the band wanted to necessarily go that route. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Chili Peppers and funk, and my musical taste, even at that age, was so diverse, you couldn't really pigeonhole into that. I don't know what happened. I think that there were issues with Dan and Dave. I think that, I don't know. I really don't. I couldn't give you a concrete answer on how it ended, but it did.
Well, I mean, some of them are a little personal. I don't really want to get too far into that, but the musical differences is a real thing. We were kind of a diverse band, and we did some things that I think I would never do again, but I'm not necessarily, and it's more of the funk stuff. I wouldn't never be in a band like that again. I don't necessarily regret it. We had that, and we had some stuff that were kind of pop punk and maybe even more Fugazi or whatever, Big Black. But we kind of reached a point where we were just kind of a little too all over the place when we were coming up with song ideas. The focus had just been gone.
I don't know the exact beginning of the end, but basically it was Dan wanted to remain more straightforward pop punk, and the rest of us wanted to just write whatever we were feeling. And at the time, we were into bands like Fugazi and Red Hot Chili Peppers and stuff like that, as well as other pop punk bands and stuff like that, Jawbreaker, Sam I Am, which Dan didn't really like as much the Sam I Am direction of pop punk as he did Ramones or things like that. And in my opinion, Ben Weasel kind of brainwashed him into thinking that he needed to stay pop punk and not stray away from that style, and to kind of have more of a direction in the band that was focused rather than how we were starting to go, which was writing whatever style we felt, and Dan didn't like it.
Yeah, so the rest of the band, me, Dave, Adam, and Strat, we started another band with Sky Matt Bessemer called Ethylene, which ended up being kind of more of like a alternative rock with like a more with a punk influence instead of being like a punk band. And we did, you know, we toured Europe and we had great shows there. We signed to this record label that was really shady, and it was just like that's when we started. The band was called Ethylene, and when we started Ethylene, that's when being a band became a business. So we had a good run, though. I mean, I had a great time in that band. I still love a lot of the songs. You know, it's like that was a great, in my opinion, that was the great next step past Sludgeworth. Because I did for Sludgeworth, I did all the booking. I got all the artwork done. Like I did the business end of Sludgeworth. And as you know, because you've done the business end a million times, it was exhausting. So with Ethylene and having a label, and then there was a period where we actually had a manager. He was a sports manager, but we had a couple managers actually. And then you were able to kind of put like stuff off on them, and then just kind of be a musician, which was what I wanted. But that never, just being in the time period, that didn't work out so well either. The time of Sludgeworth and the time of Ethylene, it's night and day. They're just two different periods in punk or rock music in general. That was a weird period. Whereas like Sludgeworth was such like just a fun. It was a fun time to be like a punk kid, and then music got weird.
To clarify just slightly, after Sludgeworth broke up, Adam, Dave, Strat, and Brian recruited vocalist Matt Bessemer, and they started a band called Pound, which eventually became Ethylene.
Good, I'm going to go on to track 14, and this one really seems like it became one of the anthems, the 2 Feet on the Ground.
Yeah, I just, we just came up with that the same way. Those guys were just playing with some stuff and kind of shaped it. I think I came up with the chorus on that. I think Dave came up with the verse, and Brian started playing the middle part. He kind of did like a little breakdown and then did a drum part, and then that fell into place. And then, my memory of that is like I remember Strat said something about 2 feet, and I just started singing 2 feet on the ground, and it worked. And I immediately knew what it was about, and just, just one of those things that just kind of fell into place at practice.
And it's one of those phrases that's perfect for that idea of saying, like, of building your own confidence, of trying to be who you are and stand strong.
Yeah, that's all it is. I was a really big advocate of saying, okay, I think this funk stuff should go, and we should stick to what we do well and put more focus into that. And I just don't think they felt that way. And not necessarily with the funk, but just I think a lot of stuff we had disagreements on was a lot of times they felt stuff was a little too simplistic, and their answer would be to make stuff a little more complex, where to this day I just don't feel that way. I never have. I'm going to go into the grave feeling that way. You know, I mean, my favorite music of all genres usually comes down to like 4 chords. You know, whether it doesn't have to be the Ramones. It could be a Hank Williams song or a Tom Petty song or a Who song or a King song or whatever it is. I never felt like you have to write complex parts to have a good song. I still don't feel that. I mean, you can put a lot of chord changes and stuff and time changes and still have a great song, but you don't necessarily have to. You know, a lot of the best songs I think ever written do come down to 4 chords. You know, so that was kind of a thing where I think we were kind of differing. I think, like I said, there was a little bit of a turning point. I think they wanted to do stuff that was, I don't really know. I mean, they weren't in the same place anymore. They were kind of growing out of it. At least that's the way I view it.
There was something that Adam had said, and I'm only put it in if you have a response to it, but he thought maybe the influence of Ben was, to them, also a reason that you were distancing from these guys.
Oh, okay.
Do you feel that's true? I mean, once again, this will only go on if you feel comfortable about it.
They weren't the only ones that ever tell me that, you know? I've had other people tell me that too. I think there might be something to that. I mean, I have, like, after I wasn't in Screeching Weasel anymore, I did a lot of soul searching. I had thought about, you know, stuff just like what you just asked me, of many, many, many people over the years. And I can't say they're wrong. I can say that he definitely did have an influence on me when I was younger. A pretty strong one. And I think they kind of felt like it was too much, and maybe they were right. That did change over the course of time, thank God. But, you know, it's a weird thing, you know. I think that's another really, really complex question, because you know, he was somebody I really looked up to, because I felt like I didn't have a lot of role models in my upbringing. So I looked up to him, and basically I feel like now I really looked up to the wrong person. And I think maybe they saw that and I didn't. There could be aspects of that, you know. I don't know. I think what they're saying probably does have some validity.
For the last track of the record, you will hear from Strat, then Brian, and then Adam, and then finally Dan Vapid, about the uniqueness of the band Sludgeworth. A lot of what they are saying are very similar, but I thought it was interesting to put them all into the podcast so that you could see how, along the same lines, even though they thought very differently, they seemed to unite in how to construct songs together. But first, let's hear from Vapid on the last track, track number 15, You and I.
You and I is really, I really like that song a lot. That was another collaboration, mainly me, Dave, and Strat, if I remember correctly. I think Adam may have came up with something in that song too. But just kind of had the riffs, kind of shaped him at practice, started singing those lyrics over it. And one of the things that I remember about that song I'm really actually pretty proud of, was that we recorded that song live. There are 2 overdubs in that song. There's a backing vocal, and there's one lead there's one lead guitar track. Everything else was done live. And you know, when I think about that song now, I was like, wow, we actually, like, that just does not happen anymore, you know. And most of those songs weren't done live. I mean, we played them together, but then we would go back and you know, track guitars or track bass. But with that one, for whatever reason, it just came out like that, all live, and a vocal and everything just came out just right. And I think a lot of that had to do with, we just used to practice a lot, you know. We used to practice like 3 days a week. And so, you know, looking back, it's probably one of those moments that I'm like pretty proud of. Not a lot of the records I played on have moments like that. And I don't think a lot of people know that, you know.
I know. I mean, when I go back and look at the Weasel stuff, the ones that I really love is the ones, where you are a band and you can go in the studio and pretty much do it the way it was intended to do, and you get that whole feeling of it being a group.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it just gelled, and we just got it right. It's one of those things that I don't think I've had since we recorded that song. I don't think I've ever had that experience since. You know, nobody records that way anymore. They haven't for like at least, 15 years or something. So, this was back in the days when there was tape, Yeah, but we got it with that one. So I was pretty excited about that.
My last question for you, Mike, is Sludgeworth was a very unique band to me, I thought. Why do you feel this may be true, and what did you bring to the table for that band?
The unique thing about the band is the background in music that we came from. You would have never thought that we would write music like that. We all came from the 80s, hardcore punk scene, metal scene, all that shit. And when we got together and we started writing songs, it was like amazing, like holy shit, man! I didn't know that we would actually like to do this stuff because we were so, programmed, to like this kind of music and that kind of music. That's what I think is unique about us.
In terms of our songs, in terms of, we all had such a vast, influence. It was, Adam was super into metal. I was into metal. Dan had been in punk bands, and he was super into Ramones-y type stuff. So you had all these different backgrounds in music and tastes, just merged, a beautiful. It couldn't have ended up any better.
I think Sludgeworth was a very unique band because we all had slightly different backgrounds. I actually, for the 2 years that I wasn't around the punk scene, I was playing in my basement a lot and playing a lot of bluesy kind of stuff. And I think that I helped add a little bit of grooviness, or what eventually we started calling the funkiness of the band. And I think that helped make us more unique. It wasn't all just the straightforward pop punk songs that we did. We had kind of different little parts here and there. And Brian's drumming, I think, also lent itself to kind of a more groovy feel rather than just straightforward, Bill Stevenson type drums. Or Dave and Strat are obviously really good musicians and wrote a lot of the stuff. So Dave, Strat, and Dan were all very accomplished, pop punk songwriters.
Dan, you and I are constantly doing some new projects, so it is sometimes bothersome to have to dwell too much on old projects. But I do feel Sludgeworth was a great band and short-lived. What do you think Sludgeworth had going for itself?
In some ways, I think we were just slightly ahead of the trend that was about to come, which I would say, maybe, 93, definitely by 94, it was definitely out there. I think we had that going for us. Like I said, I think early on we had a really good camaraderie. I think a couple aspects, like I said, it just kind of fell apart between, certain things and just musical differences. But my answer in this question, I'm
Actually, Dan, your first part was very good, so you don't need to search more. The second one sort of went back into stuff you'd already said.
Yeah, right, okay.
It was a little bit before. I feel that too. And I think I even talked about that with Adam, how I felt it was a little bit before what was going on. in the music scene. And I don't know specifically if Sludgeworth was an influence, but it was definitely a precursor of what was sort of taking root in the scene.
You know, this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, just wanting to do something a little more melodic, I guess. A punk rock band that had a little more melody in it. Screeching Weasel was doing it. Just kind of wanted to do it in a different way, I guess.
Thank you for listening to episode 23 of Jughead's Basement, featuring Sludgeworth's Loser of the Year. This podcast took me, maybe 2 years to finally get done. I apologize for the long gap in time. I am hoping to get back into rounding up a few bands to interview and have more podcasts for you in 2018. I'd also like to thank my co-conspirators who helped me out with this podcast, Jason Brow and Paul Joseph. Paul Joseph actually did most of the editing work on the Sludgeworth podcast, so thank you very much for joining our team and for doing so much work. Please donate some money. I will have information about that up at our Facebook page and the Podomatic page, if I can figure that out. We decided to do away with the Jughead's Basement webpage. It was costing more money, and I was actually getting more mileage out of just having the Podomatic site. So please direct people to Jughead's Basement on Facebook or at the Podomatic site. And please share this. That's our only form of advertising. So once again, thank you for listening, and I hope to bring you, my audience, more. Thank you very much. Goodbye from Japan.